Macron decorates Indonesian leader with France's highest honor. Ukraine and Russia return to peace talks in Istanbul. Here's what we know so far, and how strategic Russian enterprise burns in St. Petersburg, footage from scene. The latest news next. French President Emmanuel Macron bestowed Indonesia's leader with France's top award during a visit to a military base on Thursday, May 29th, before a trip to the world's largest Buddhist temple. After meeting for talks in the capital Jakarta, Macron and his counterpart Prabowo Subianto flew by helicopter on Thursday to a military academy in Magelang, a city in central Java surrounded by mountains. The pair attended a military parade, and Macron gave Prabowo the Grand Cross of the Legion of Honor, France's highest military or civil award. Macron and Prabowo rode in a jeep, with the pair welcomed by a marching band and hundreds of students waving Indonesian flags. Prabowo is an ex-general accused of rights abuses under dictator Suharto's rule in the late 1990s. He was discharged from the military. He was discharged from the military over his role in the abductions of democracy activists, but denied the allegations and was now charged. On Wednesday, Macron and Prabowo called for progress on mutual recognition between Israel and the Palestinians at a key meeting next month, as Macron brought the world's most populous Muslim-majority nation into his diplomatic efforts. Indonesia has stated that once Israel recognizes Palestine, Indonesia is ready to recognize Israel and open the diplomatic relationship, said Prabowo. Indonesia has no formal ties with Israel, and support for the Palestinian cause among Indonesians runs high. The nations also signed a series of agreements on cooperation in a range of fields, including defense, trade, agriculture, disaster management, culture and transport. Macron's visit to Indonesia is the second stop of a three-nation six-day tour of Southeast Asia that began with Vietnam and concludes in Singapore. Macron will deliver the opening address Friday at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, Asia's premier security forum. Russia once again calls Ukraine to negotiations, this time with a promise to present a so-called memorandum outlining the terms for a ceasefire. In response, Kyiv has handed Moscow a document outlining its position and insists that the Russians do the same before a potential new meeting on Monday, June 2nd. RBC Ukraine has gathered what is known about the possible second round of talks and the positions of both sides. What do we know about Russia's memorandum and its demands? After no breakthrough was reached during the May 16th Istanbul meeting on a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, and the US declared that the negotiation process had hit a dead end, US President Donald Trump held a phone call with Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. During the conversation on May 19th, the Kremlin dictator expressed his readiness to offer Ukraine a memorandum on a ceasefire and a future peace treaty. He claimed that compromises need to be found that would satisfy both countries. Since then, the Russian side has not disclosed the content of the memorandum. However, in recent days, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova stated that the draft includes several positions such as principles of a settlement, timelines for a possible peace agreement, potential temporary ceasefire if corresponding agreements are reached. Meanwhile, yesterday, Reuters, citing three anonymous Russian sources close to the talks, revealed the conditions that Putin is setting for ending the war. According to these sources, the Kremlin dictator seeks a written commitment from Western countries not to expand the alliance eastward, meaning no NATO membership for Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, or other former Soviet republics. Russia also wants the memorandum to include Ukrainians' neutral status, the lifting of certain Western sanctions, addressing the issue of frozen Russian assets, and the protection of Russian-speaking citizens in Ukraine. The presidential office in Kyiv notes that these demands merely demonstrate the Kremlin leadership's delusion. Once again, Putin is resorting to absurd demands, including references to Moldova and Georgia, even though those countries are not involved in the armed conflict. Mikhailo Podolyak, advisor to the head of the president's office, explained to RBC Ukraine why Russia is leaking such insider details about its conditions.
They want to use this false information to say, look, we're ready for certain compromises, so you should be less radical. And once again, this is a completely obvious and rather primitive tactic that Russia constantly uses.
Russia offered date and venue for new talks where it will present its memorandum. Regarding the timeline for delivering the memorandum, as Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky stated yesterday, Russia had promised to provide the so-called document with specific points after the prisoner exchange in the 1,000 for 1,000 format. The president also said that Defense Minister Rustem Umerov, who heads Ukrainian's delegation in negotiations with Russia, reached out to his counterpart Vladimir Medinsky to find out when Ukraine would receive the memorandum. They kept assuring us it's coming, but we never received anything. No one did. We turned to the United States. They're still waiting too. Everyone is waiting, Zelensky said, adding that the memorandum has been awaited for over a week. In response, Medinsky claimed that he, not Umerov, initiated the conversation and that during the call, he allegedly proposed a specific date and place for the exchange of memorandums listing the conditions for ending the war. According to Medinsky, Russia is supposedly ready on the spot to begin substantive discussions on each point of the proposed ceasefire agreement.
The Ukrainian side said they needed to consult. We are waiting for confirmation from them as soon as possible and are ready on the date we proposed in the coming days to meet in person and start working.
Later, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov also made a statement announcing that Moscow is proposing to hold the second round of talks with Kiev on June 2nd in Istanbul. Reportedly, that is where the Russian delegation will present its list of conditions for a ceasefire.
As agreed, the Russian side promptly developed the corresponding memorandum, which outlines our position on all aspects of reliably addressing the root causes of the crisis.
That same evening, Lavrov held talks with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. According to the Russian side, they discussed preparations for the next round of Ukraine-Russia negotiations in Istanbul. However, the U.S. State Department stated that during the call, Rubio urged the Russians to engage in a good faith dialogue with Ukraine. Ukraine sends its ceasefire demands to Russia. Meanwhile, the head of Ukrainian's delegation, Umerov, made it clear to the Russians that Kiev wants Moscow to deliver the memorandum in advance for review. Following the meeting in Turkey on May 16th, the world expected the Russian side to formulate and send to Ukraine and its partners a memorandum outlining their vision for steps toward a ceasefire. Unfortunately, the Russian side tried to delay this process. Umerov wrote on Facebook on the evening of May 28th. However, according to him, pressure worked, and after strong statements from President Trump, European leaders, and President Zelensky, which demonstrated that the world is united in its pursuit of peace for Ukraine, the Russians finally announced they had completed their memorandum. Still, Umerov noted that Russia is delaying the delivery of the document. In the meantime, Ukraine has handed over its own position paper to the Russian side.
I gave the head of the Russian delegation our document, which reflects Ukraine's position. They received it. We reaffirm Ukraine's readiness for a full and unconditional ceasefire and continued diplomatic engagement.
He emphasized that the Ukrainian delegation is not opposed to further meetings with the Russians and expects their memorandum so that the upcoming meeting isn't just symbolic and could actually bring us closer to ending the war. The Russian side still has at least 4 days before their flight to send us their document for review, Umerov stressed. The head of the delegation also reminded that the Russian side had promised to hand over the memorandum immediately after the prisoner exchange.
We call on the Russian side to immediately fulfill this promise and stop trying to derail the meeting. Diplomacy must be substantive, and the new meeting must produce results.
Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha also commented on Russia's proposal to hold talks on June 2nd. He expressed hope that Moscow would not sabotage the next round of negotiations and will immediately submit their proposals for our view as previously agreed.
Why wait until Monday? If the Russians have finally elaborated on their memorandum after 10 days of reflections and attacks, it can be passed to us right away.
It's worth noting that while the Russians are delaying the delivery of the memorandum to Ukraine, they have already effectively informed the US, which is pushing for a diplomatic resolution to the war, that they will not be showing them their proposals. A spokesperson for Russia's foreign ministry said that Moscow will not share its version of the memorandum with the US. She claimed that Moscow supposedly has no agreements with the Washington or any other countries regarding document exchanges. Meanwhile, Washington clearly awaits Russia's proposal. On May 27th, US President Special Envoy on Ukraine, Kit Kellogg, said the United States had received proposals from Ukraine concerning a potential peace agreement. They are now awaiting similar proposals from the Russian side. In the city of St. Petersburg, Russia, fire broke out at the Avangard plant during the night of May 29th. Firefighters are working to extinguish the blaze at the facility, which is listed as a strategic enterprise in the country, according to the Telegram channel of the St. Petersburg Ministry of Emergency Situations and Russian social media sources. It should be noted that news about the fire at the St. Petersburg Avangard plant appeared online late in the evening the day before. Additionally, footage was shared showing thick black smoke rising over the city due to the fire. The cause of the fire at the facility has not been disclosed. Russian sources wrote that the fire emergency is not related to a possible air attack. Local authorities have not disclosed details of the incident. Meanwhile, the St. Petersburg Emergency Services reported after the first night that firefighting efforts are ongoing at the production building on Kondratyevsky Prospect 72. On the 5th floor of the 6-story building, a fire is burning over an area of 100 square meters. There are no reports of casualties, the St. Petersburg Ministry of Emergency Situations stated. It was also reported that 11 units of equipment and 41 personnel were involved in extinguishing the fire. Later, local emergency services announced that the fire at the Avangard plant had been contained. Work to completely eliminate the fire continues. The open flames have been extinguished, the city's Ministry of Emergency Situation representatives reported online. What is known about the Avangard plant according to open sources? This scientific and production enterprise manufactures radio electronics, microcircuit technology, and is involved in instrument engineering as well as the production of basic supporting structures for radio electronic equipment. JSC Avangard is listed among the strategic and system-forming enterprises of Russia and holds the status of Federal Scientific and Production Center in the country. In 2014, the Microsystem Technology Center was opened on the basis of JSC Avangard. The main building is located in St. Petersburg at Kondratyevsky Avenue 72. These winter explosions occurred in Moscow, followed by a large fire at a big warehouse. That's all for today. Thanks for watching this video. Like and subscribe.